Four men went to sleep on Chinatown streets on October 5, 2019. They never woke up. Randy Santos beat them to death with a 4-foot metal bar while they slept. Police found him carrying the weapon covered in blood and hair. He admitted it. "Yeah, that's me," he told police when shown surveillance footage. But his defense isn't that he didn't do it. His defense is that voices in his head told him he had to kill 40 people or he would die too, and the law might let him walk free. If you want to see justice for victims like these, like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because this story raises questions that will make your blood boil. Now let's break down exactly what happened. October 5, 2019. Manhattan's Chinatown neighborhood. The streets around a square just blocks from City Hall are mostly empty at 1:30 in the morning. A few people sleep on doorsteps and sidewalks. Some are homeless. Some just missed the last bus home. They're vulnerable, exposed, defenseless. Randy Santos walks through these streets carrying nothing. He's 24 years old. Dominican-born, raised in New York. He speaks Spanish, limited English. 2 months ago, he walked out of jail diagnosed with schizophrenia. He was given treatment referrals, medication prescriptions. He used none of them. Tonight, something in his mind tells him he needs to kill. Not just kill 40 people. If he doesn't reach 40, he'll die himself. At least that's what his defense attorney will claim 6 years later when his trial finally begins. Santos finds a 4-foot metal bar lying on the street. It's heavy, solid, perfect for what he's about to do. He picks it up and keeps walking. Around the Chinatown square, men sleep. Some have been sleeping rough for years. Some are just resting between shifts. Some fell asleep waiting for transportation. None of them see Santos approaching. The surveillance cameras capture what happens next. Santos approaches a sleeping man. He lifts the bar high over his head, and he brings it down, again, and again, and again. The man never wakes up. He dies right there on the sidewalk. Santos moves to the next victim. Same method. Lifts the bar overhead, brings it crashing down. The sound of metal on skull echoes through the empty streets. A couple walking home from a date on Bowery Street sees him. They watch in horror as Santos stands over a man, lifting and bringing down the bar repeatedly. They can't process what they're witnessing. By the time they think to call police, Santos has moved on. He finds a third victim, then a fourth, all sleeping, all defenseless, all beaten to death while unconscious. The fifth victim is different. David Hernandez, 49 years old, somehow survives the initial attack. His head is caved in. Blood pours from wounds all over his skull. But he's conscious. He staggers to his feet and stumbles toward Bowery Street, toward lights, toward help. Police officers are already on Bowery trying to revive one of Santos' other victims. They see Hernandez approach, barely able to stand, covered in blood. They immediately call for more units, for ambulances, for crime scene investigators. At 1:40 a.m., just 10 minutes after the attacks began, police respond to a 911 call reporting a fight in Chinatown. They find chaos, blood splattered on doorways and sidewalks. For dead men, one critically injured survivor, and a suspect still in the area. Hernandez is the only one who will survive this night. Barely. Santos doesn't run. He doesn't hide. He keeps walking through Chinatown carrying the metal bar. Blood drips from it. Hair sticks to it. His DNA is on one end. His victim's blood is on the other. When police officers spot him near the intersection of Mulberry Street and Canal Street, he's still holding the weapon. They draw their guns and order him to drop it. Santos complies. He's arrested without incident. The sun rises over Manhattan's Chinatown on October 5, 2019, revealing a crime scene that spans multiple blocks. 4 men are dead. 1 man is critically injured, and the killer is in custody with the murder weapon. Assistant District Attorney Alfred Peterson will later tell jurors that surveillance video captured Santos checking his surroundings before attacking. The couple on the date will testify they saw him commit murder. The metal bar will be tested and confirm Santos' DNA on one end, victim's blood on the other. But there's something else the evidence shows. something that will become critical at trial 6 years later. Surveillance cameras capture Santos looking around before attacking, checking if anyone is watching. When he sees the couple approaching, he pauses, waits for them to pass, then continues his attack once they're gone. This isn't the behavior of someone who doesn't know what he's doing. This is calculation. This is awareness. This is someone who understands he's committing crimes and wants to avoid witnesses. When police show Santos surveillance footage of the attacks after his arrest, they ask him to identify the person on screen. Santos watches himself beating men to death, and he says 4 words that will haunt this case. "Yeah, that's me." October 6, 2019. Santos is arraigned in criminal court. He's charged with 4 counts of murder in the first degree, 1 count of attempted murder in the first degree, 1 count of attempted murder in the second degree, and 1 count of assault in the first degree. Through a Spanish interpreter, he pleads not guilty. The legal process that follows will take nearly 7 years. Santos will cycle between jail and psychiatric facilities. Defense attorneys will build an insanity defense. Prosecutors will prepare to argue Santos knew exactly what he was doing. And in January 2026, a jury will finally hear both sides and decide. Was Randy Santos a man so consumed by mental illness that he can't be held responsible for killing 4 people? Or was he a violent predator who calculated his crimes and now wants to use mental illness as an excuse? The answer matters, because if the insanity defense succeeds, Randy Santos won't go to prison. He'll go to a psychiatric facility. He could eventually be released if doctors determine he's no longer a danger. But before we get to the trial, we need to understand who died that night. Because they weren't just homeless people sleeping on streets. They were fathers, preachers, grandfathers, men with names and stories and people who loved them. The bodies are removed from Chinatown streets on October 5, 2019. Medical examiner investigators photograph the crime scenes. Police interview witnesses. The metal bar is bagged as evidence. And slowly, the identities of the dead emerge. Chuen Kok, 83 years old. To most of Manhattan, he was invisible, just another elderly homeless man sleeping in a doorway. But to Chinatown residents, he was Uncle, a fixture of the neighborhood, someone people checked on. Kim Mui was one of those people. For years, she brought Kok food, offered him money, encouraged him to go to shelters. A lot of people who saw him every day cared about him, Mui told reporters after his death. Kok slept in the same spot most nights, a doorway where he felt safe. On October 18, 2019, dozens of people attended his memorial service arranged by local residents. They walked past his doorway where someone had created a makeshift memorial. Flowers, candles, photos, a community saying goodbye to someone they saw every single day. The oldest victim, the man everyone called Uncle, beaten to death in the doorway where he slept. Anthony Manson, 49 years old, originally from Chicago. He traveled the country to preach. He worked to help establish a Pentecostal church in Kosciuszko, Mississippi 2 decades earlier. But his real calling was helping people understand homelessness. Manson was familiar to Chinatown regulars. You'd see him with his laptop propped on a chess table in a park, working on posts for his blog, Anthony the Priestly Artist. He wrote about scripture and psychology. He praised children's hospitals. He urged people to help hurricane victims. He offered ideas about water conservation, social issues, and yes, homelessness. In February 2017, Manson wrote blog posts aimed at making homelessness more visible to everyone who see, but don't really see. He wanted people to understand, to care, to help. "I hope I can rally your support for all those who work for and with the homeless," he wrote, "and that we can walk away civilly with more of a deep understanding of this issue, without the finger pointing." 2.5 years later, he was beaten to death while sleeping in the neighborhood where he preached and blogged and tried to make people see the humanity in the homeless. His brother told the New York Times the family didn't know Manson was homeless and in New York. They didn't know he needed help. They didn't know until police called to say he was dead. Florencio Moran, 39 years old, took authorities nearly 2 weeks to identify him. He had no known address. No immediate family anyone could locate. No one came forward initially to claim him or say they knew him. The youngest victim, the one who took the longest to identify, the one whose life remains mostly unknown. Just that he was there, sleeping on a Chinatown street, when Randy Santos found him. Nazario Vásquez Villegas, 55 years old. His story is different, critically different, because Villegas wasn't homeless. He had a home on Staten Island. He had a job as a factory worker. He was a father, a grandfather, part of a big family. Mexican-born, he'd built a life in New York. He made friends easily. People described him as congenial, the kind of man who loved to shoot the breeze with pals. On October 4th, 2019, Villegas went to Chinatown planning to catch a bus to a casino. He spent time with friends on a Chinatown corner. He missed his bus. He fell asleep waiting. His daughter Guadalupe spoke to reporters after his death, grief-stricken and angry. "He was in the wrong place at the wrong time," she said. "My father was a lovely man who always worked for us and loved us very much." 3 of the 4 victims were homeless, but Villegas had a home, had a family, had a life he was returning to. He just fell asleep in the wrong place. The families of these 4 men learned of their deaths in different ways. Some got calls from medical examiners. Some saw news reports. Some waited days for official identification. Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance issued a statement after Santos' indictment. "There is perhaps no population more vulnerable to violence than the growing number of unsheltered New Yorkers who lack a safe place to sleep." He continued, "As my office works to secure justice for Chuen Kok, Anthony Manson, Nazario Vásquez Villegas, and a tragically still unidentified neighbor, our city can further honor their memories by delivering secure housing to all New Yorkers." The statement captured the intersection of homelessness, violence, and vulnerability. But it also revealed something else. At the time of that statement in late October 2019, Florencio Moran still hadn't been identified. He was a tragically still unidentified neighbor. The attacks occurred during a period when New York City's homeless population had grown to record levels. A January 2019 count found nearly 3,600 unsheltered homeless people on streets, subways, and public spaces. That was down 8% from 2 years prior, but still above the decade's average. Over 60,000 people were living in shelters. Advocates had long questioned the reliability of the annual one-night survey. The real number sleeping rough was likely much higher, and each of those people faced dangers most housed New Yorkers never consider. After the killings, then-Mayor Bill de Blasio defended the city's efforts to combat homelessness. He announced increased homeless outreach efforts and security measures in Chinatown. Too late for Kok, Manson, Moran, and Villegas. The memorial service for Chuen Kok on October 18, 2019, showed how deeply the community felt his loss. Dozens of people filled the Ing Fuk funeral home. Pallbearers carried his casket out while mourners stood in respect. For a man who died with almost nothing, he was mourned by many. No similar public memorials were held for the other victims. Their families grieved privately, but their deaths were among 319 killings in New York City in 2019, including 52 in Manhattan alone. These numbers, these statistics, they're how crime gets reported. But behind each number is a person. Someone who had a life before Randy Santos ended it. David Hernandez survived. At 49 years old, he staggered away from Santos' attack with his head caved in. He spent weeks in critical condition. The physical scars healed eventually, but the psychological scars from surviving when 4 others died, those don't heal so easily. Hernandez would later testify at trial. He'd have to relive the night he nearly died. He'd have to face Santos in court. He'd have to explain to a jury what it feels like to wake up to a metal bar crashing into your skull. But in October 2019, while Hernandez fought for his life in a hospital, police and prosecutors were building their case against Randy Santos. And what they discovered was disturbing, because this wasn't Santos' first violent incident. Not even close. Randy Santos had a history, pattern, an escalation. The Chinatown rampage didn't come out of nowhere. There were warning signs, red flags, prior victims, and people who tried to warn the system that Santos was dangerous. If you're still watching, you're clearly interested in real cases told in full. Like, share, subscribe now, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Randy Santos didn't suddenly become violent on October 5, 2019. His path to quadruple murder was paved with incidents, arrests, and warnings that went unheeded. Police would discover he had at least 6 prior arrests. Each one should have been a warning sign. Each one showed a man capable of unprovoked violence. The pattern began with a clash with his grandfather. Details of this incident remain unclear, but defense attorney Marnie Zine would later describe it as the beginning of Santos' increasingly violent episodes. The first domino falling. Santos' relatives would later tell reporters he had a history of drug use since arriving in the United States from the Dominican Republic years earlier. Whether the drugs triggered his mental illness or he used drugs to cope with untreated schizophrenia remains unclear. But the combination of substance abuse and severe mental illness created a dangerous spiral. December 2017. Andrea Dazio, an Italian investment banker, is vacationing in New York with his family. They're riding a subway train when Santos suddenly punches Dazio in the face. No provocation. No argument. Santos just decides the stranger is laughing at him. Whether Dazio actually was or wasn't doesn't matter to Santos, and attacks. Dazio is stunned. His family is terrified. They report the assault. Santos is arrested and charged. Dazio tells prosecutors he's willing to testify against Santos. He wants this violent man held accountable before he hurts someone else. "I knew he was going to hurt other people," Dazio told the New York Times years later after the Chinatown murders. That statement haunts, because Dazio was right. He knew. He warned them. He predicted exactly what would happen. And the Manhattan District Attorney's Office dismissed and sealed the case anyway. Santos walked free. Another incident. Santos chokes a man at an employment agency. Again, police are called. Again, Santos is arrested. Again, the charges apparently don't stick. The pattern continues. May 2019. Santos punches a homeless man inside a Brooklyn shelter. Another assault. Another arrest. This time, it's his 6th arrest. 6 times police have taken Santos into custody for violence. 6 times the system has processed him. And 6 times nothing stops the escalation. After the May 2019 arrest, Santos ends up in jail. This is where the story takes a crucial turn. Because during this jail stint, Santos is evaluated by mental health professionals. They diagnose him with schizophrenia, a serious mental illness characterized by hallucinations, delusions, and disordered thinking. The diagnosis isn't entirely new. Santos had previously been diagnosed with schizophreniform disorder, a shorter-term mental health condition similar to schizophrenia. He'd turned up at a hospital complaining about hearing voices in his head. Medical staff asked about drug use, but he didn't get the treatment he needed. Now, in jail after his 6th arrest for violence, he's finally given a formal schizophrenia diagnosis. This should trigger intensive intervention, treatment plans, medication, monitoring, all the things someone with severe mental illness needs to function without endangering themselves or others. August 2019. Randy Santos is released from jail. He walks out with paperwork, treatment referrals, prescriptions for medication that could control his symptoms, and he uses none of it. He doesn't go to the treatment centers he's referred to. He doesn't fill his prescriptions. He doesn't take medication. He doesn't check in with mental health professionals. He just goes back to living on the streets and in abandoned buildings, collecting bottles for cash, with voices in his head getting louder. This is the system failure everyone will argue about later. Santos was diagnosed. He was given resources, but there was no follow-up, no enforcement, no one checking whether he actually got treatment. In a city of millions, one more person with schizophrenia released untreated doesn't trigger alarms. It should have, because Santos' violence wasn't random. It was escalating. From punching strangers to choking to attacking homeless people, people even more vulnerable than the general public. The targets were getting easier. The violence was getting worse. About a week before October 5th, Santos conducts what prosecutors will later call a trial run. He finds a wooden stick. He approaches a man sleeping on a bench in a different Manhattan neighborhood. Santos beats him, bashing his head with the stick. But he doesn't stop there. Prosecutors say Santos then tried to pick up the injured man and throw him in the Hudson River. This wasn't just assault. This was attempted murder. Santos wanted his victim dead. The man survived only because Santos couldn't complete the drowning. But it proved Santos was willing to kill. It proved the voices were commanding him toward murder, not just violence. The attack doesn't make major news. It's just another assault in a city where assaults happen daily. But it's a dry run for what's coming. Santos is testing, seeing what it feels like to try to kill someone, seeing if he can do it, seeing if the voices will stop if he obeys them. They don't stop. They get louder. October 5th, 2019, early morning hours. Santos is homeless, living in an abandoned building. He later tells the New York Times in a jail interview, "I was looking for bottles for cash. I needed the money because I was living on the streets and at an abandoned building. That's all I remember. But that's not all. Surveillance footage and witness testimony will prove he remembers more than he claims. Or at least, he was conscious and aware enough to commit calculated murder." When Santos is arrested carrying the bloodied metal bar just minutes after the killings, police don't yet know about his mental health history. They don't know about the schizophrenia diagnosis from months earlier. They don't know about the voices. They just know they've caught a man who brutally murdered four people and nearly killed a fifth. Santos is taken to the police station. Through a Spanish interpreter, he's questioned. And this is where things get interesting, because Santos acknowledges what he did. Police show him surveillance footage of the attacks. The video is brutal. Santos lifting the bar overhead, bringing it down on sleeping victims. Again and again. It's all captured on camera from multiple angles. They ask Santos, "Is that you?" His response, "Yeah, that's me." Not, "I don't remember." Not, "That couldn't be me." Not denial, just simple acknowledgement. "Yes, that's me committing quadruple murder on video." This confession will become crucial at trial, because it shows Santos recognized himself. He understood what he was looking at. He knew the person on that video was him, and he knew that person was killing people. October 6th, 2019. Santos' arraignment. He appears in court through interpreter services. The charges are read. 4 counts of murder in the first degree. 1 count of attempted murder in the first degree. 1 count of attempted murder in the second degree. 1 count of assault in the first degree. First-degree murder in New York requires proof of specific aggravating factors. In Santos' case, prosecutors argue the murders were committed during a course of conduct involving multiple victims. That elevates them from second to first degree. Santos pleads not guilty through his attorney. He's ordered held without bail and is immediately transferred to the psychiatric ward at Bellevue Hospital. Even at this early stage, authorities recognize Santos' severe mental illness requires specialized custody. He won't be held in a regular jail cell. He needs psychiatric monitoring. And thus begins the long legal process that will stretch from 2019 to 2026. Santos cycling between psychiatric facilities and court appearances. Evaluations by competing mental health experts. Arguments over competency to stand trial. Years of delay while both sides prepare for a trial that will determine whether Santos is a murderer or a victim of his own mind. But back in October 2019, the question everyone asks is simple. How? How did someone with 6 prior arrests for violence, a schizophrenia diagnosis, and a pattern of escalating attacks, including attempting to drown someone, end up unsupervised on the streets? Andrea Daisio asked that question. How could they let him walk free? The Italian banker who was punched in 2017 and tried to testify against Santos only to have the case dismissed wanted to know. His warning went unheeded. His prediction came true. And less than 2 years later, 4 people were dead. The answer isn't simple. It involves bail reform, jail overcrowding, underfunded mental health systems, a justice system that processes thousands of cases and can't follow up on everyone. a mental health system that provides diagnoses and prescriptions but can't force treatment on people who refuse it. Randy Santos fell through every crack. He exploited every gap. And on October 5, 2019, that failure cost 4 people their lives. The Randy Santos case exposes a question American society still can't answer. What do we do with people who are seriously mentally ill and dangerously violent? When someone is diagnosed with schizophrenia, released from jail, given treatment referrals and medication, and then refuses all of it, what happens next? Who's responsible when that person kills? Santos' defense will argue the system failed him. Prosecutors will argue he failed to use the system's resources. And somewhere in that argument, 4 people are dead and 1 survivor carries scars forever. Let's break down exactly what happened between August 2019 and October 5, 2019, the 2 months when intervention could have prevented murder. August 2019. Randy Santos walks out of jail after his 6th arrest for violence. He's been evaluated by mental health professionals during his incarceration. The diagnosis is clear: schizophrenia. This isn't a mild condition. Schizophrenia is a severe mental disorder affecting how a person thinks, feels, and behaves. People with schizophrenia may experience hallucinations, seeing or hearing things that aren't there. Delusions, false beliefs that persist despite evidence to the contrary. Disorganized thinking and speech, difficulty focusing, problems with memory, and in some cases, voices commanding them to do things. The standard treatment for schizophrenia is a combination of antipsychotic medication and therapy. The medication helps control symptoms, quieting voices, reducing delusions, improving ability to think clearly. Therapy helps patients develop coping strategies and understand their condition. When Santos is released, he receives referrals to mental health treatment facilities. These are places that provide therapy, medication management, and ongoing support. He also receives prescriptions for antipsychotic medication, the drugs that could have controlled his symptoms. This is where the system meets its limitation. In the United States, you generally cannot force adults to take psychiatric medication or attend treatment unless they've been involuntarily committed or a court has ordered it. Santos wasn't committed. No court ordered treatment. He was just released with paperwork and prescriptions. And Santos does nothing. He doesn't go to the treatment centers. He doesn't fill the prescriptions. He doesn't take medication. He goes back to living on the streets and in abandoned buildings. Back to collecting bottles for cash. Back to his life. Except now he's sick and untreated and getting worse. During those 2 months, the voices get louder. According to his defense attorney's later statements, Santos begins believing he must kill 40 people or he will die. Whether this specific delusion started in jail or developed after release isn't clear. But by early October, it's consuming him. The question becomes, should someone have followed up? Should treatment centers have tracked him down? Should probation officers have monitored him? Should social workers have checked whether he filled his prescriptions? The answer is complicated. Mental health systems in major cities are overwhelmed. Thousands of people are diagnosed with serious mental illness. Thousands are released from jails and hospitals with treatment plans. There aren't enough social workers to follow up on everyone. There aren't enough beds in psychiatric facilities for everyone who needs them. There isn't enough funding to provide intensive case management for every person with schizophrenia. But here's what makes the Santos case particularly galling. The very area where he was living, the streets around Chinatown where he would later kill, was supposedly being monitored. The City Department of Social Services said homeless outreach workers canvassed the area twice weekly. They were supposed to connect vulnerable people with services. They were supposed to identify people in crisis. Santos was there, living on those streets, sleeping in abandoned buildings, collecting bottles, talking to voices in his head, and nobody intervened. Nobody noticed. Nobody connected him to the treatment he desperately needed. So people like Santos fall through the cracks. They're diagnosed. They're given resources. But if they don't access those resources voluntarily, there's often no one checking, no one following up, no one intervening until something terrible happens. Santos had told hospital staff earlier about hearing voices. They asked about drug use. A common question because substance abuse can cause symptoms similar to mental illness. But the focus on drug use meant Santos didn't get the intensive psychiatric care he needed. The voices weren't from drugs. They were from schizophrenia. And they were getting worse. If you're still watching, you're clearly interested in real cases told in full. Like, share, subscribe now, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. Defense attorney Marnie Zine will later argue that Santos' prior diagnoses of schizophreniform disorder should have triggered more aggressive intervention. This shorter-term condition often progresses to full schizophrenia. Medical professionals knew Santos was at risk. They knew he was hearing voices. They knew he had a history of violence. But knowledge alone doesn't prevent tragedy. Someone has to act on that knowledge. And in Santos' case, no one did. About a week before the Chinatown murders, Santos commits his trial run, attacking a man with a wooden stick and trying to throw him in the Hudson River. This victim survives but is badly hurt. The attack happens in a different Manhattan neighborhood. It's reported to police, but it doesn't connect to Santos immediately. It's just one more assault in a city that sees hundreds weekly. If investigators had linked that attack to Santos' pattern of violence and mental illness, could the October 5th murders have been prevented? Possibly. But making those connections in real time requires resources, databases, and manpower that most police departments don't have for every assault case. October 5th arrives. Santos has been untreated for 2 months. The voices are relentless. He believes he must kill or he will die. And he finds that metal bar on a Chinatown street. After the murders, critics point to multiple system failures. First, the criminal justice system. Santos had 6 arrests for violence. 6 times he was brought before judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys. 6 times the system had an opportunity to mandate treatment. 6 times it didn't happen. Cases were dismissed, sealed, or resolved without requiring psychiatric intervention. Andrea Dazio's 2017 subway assault case is particularly galling. An international banker willing to testify. Clear evidence of unprovoked violence. A victim who literally predicted, "I knew he was going to hurt other people," and the Manhattan DA dismissed it. That decision meant Santos had no assault conviction on his record when he was evaluated in 2019. His violence looked less severe than it actually was. Second, the mental health system. Diagnosis without follow-up is nearly useless for severe cases. Santos got the diagnosis. He got the referrals. He got the prescriptions. But there was no mechanism to ensure he actually received treatment. Mental health facilities can't chase down every patient who doesn't show up for appointments. Third, the homelessness system. Santos was living rough streets and abandoned buildings. Homeless outreach workers try to connect vulnerable people with services. They supposedly canvassed his area twice weekly, but they're overwhelmed too. One more homeless person with mental illness doesn't trigger intensive intervention. Except Santos wasn't just one more person. He had 6 arrests. He had documented schizophrenia. He tried to drown someone a week earlier. And still, nobody intervened. So whose fault is it? The prosecutor who dismissed Dazio's case? The mental health professionals who didn't follow up? The outreach workers who didn't find Santos? The legislators who underfund these systems? Or Santos himself for refusing treatment? Defense attorneys will argue. Santos was sick. Seriously, demonstrably sick. He couldn't make rational decisions about treatment because his illness prevented rational thought. Expecting someone with untreated schizophrenia to voluntarily seek treatment is like expecting someone with a broken leg to walk to the hospital. The illness itself prevents the solution. Prosecutors will argue. Santos had moments of clarity. He recognized himself on video. He checked if anyone was watching before attacking. He waited for witnesses to leave. These aren't the actions of someone who can't distinguish right from wrong. These are the actions of someone who knows he's committing crimes and tries to avoid getting caught. Both arguments have merit. Both expose difficult truths about mental illness and criminal responsibility. What's undeniable is this. On August 1st, 2019, Randy Santos was in jail, diagnosed with schizophrenia, about to be released. On October 5, 2019, he murdered 4 people. In those 2 months, multiple systems had opportunities to intervene. None did. Whether that's because they couldn't or because they didn't allocate resources to try is a question every city in America faces. The aftermath of the Chinatown murders sparked discussions about bail reform, mental health funding, and involuntary commitment laws. Mayor de Blasio announced increased outreach. Advocates called for more psychiatric beds. Prosecutors reviewed policies. But none of it brought back Chuen Kok, Anthony Manson, Florencio Moran, or Nazario Vásquez Villegas. None of it healed David Hernandez. The conversation about systemic reform is important. But for the families of Santos victims, it came too late. The prosecution's case against Randy Santos is built on evidence most defense attorneys would call insurmountable. This isn't a whodunit. Santos admitted it. Witnesses saw it. Cameras recorded it. Forensics confirmed it. The question isn't whether Santos killed 4 people. He did. The question is whether he understood what he was doing and whether he knew it was wrong. But before we get to that legal battle, let's examine exactly what evidence prosecutors have. Because understanding the strength of the evidence helps explain why Santos' only viable defense is insanity. Start with the surveillance footage. Multiple cameras in Chinatown captured the attacks. The video quality varies. Some cameras are older, some newer, but the footage is clear enough. You can see Santos approach sleeping victims. You can see him lift the metal bar over his head. You can see him bring it down repeatedly. You can see him move from victim to victim. Assistant District Attorney Alfred Peterson described the footage to jurors during opening statements. Santos repeatedly lifting the bar up over his head and bringing it down on the head of victims. The jury will watch this video. They'll see the brutality. They'll see that Santos didn't strike once in panic or fear. He struck multiple times per victim. This was sustained, deliberate violence. But the surveillance footage shows something else. Something the prosecution considers their smoking gun for proving Santos knew what he was doing. Before attacking, Santos looks up and down the street. He's checking to see if anyone is watching. He's assessing whether the coast was clear. In Peterson's words, this is situational awareness. This is consciousness of surroundings. This is behavior that indicates Santos understood he was about to do something he didn't want witnesses seeing. And there's more. At one point during the rampage, Santos sees people approaching. He pauses. He waits for them to pass. Then he continues his attack. This isn't someone lost in psychotic frenzy. This is someone who recognizes potential witnesses and adjusts his behavior to avoid detection. The couple on the date, the 2 people walking home on Bowery Street, will testify at trial. They'll describe seeing Santos standing over a man, bringing the bar down again and again. They'll describe their horror and confusion. They'll describe calling police. Their testimony puts a human face on the surveillance footage. It makes the violence real for jurors in a way video alone can't. Then there's the murder weapon itself. The 4-foot metal bar that Santos found on the street and turned into an instrument of death. Police found Santos carrying this bar just minutes after the final attack. It was covered in blood. Hair stuck to it. The evidence was literally in his hands when he was arrested. Forensic testing revealed exactly what you'd expect. Santos' DNA was on one end of the bar, the end he gripped while swinging. Blood from his victims was on the other end, the end that crushed their skulls. The forensic evidence creates an unbreakable chain. Santos held this weapon and used it to kill these specific people. There's no way to dispute this evidence. No way to argue Santos wasn't the killer. The DNA doesn't lie. So Santos' defense won't try to dispute it. They'll acknowledge it and argue it doesn't matter. Police arrested Santos while he was still carrying the bloody bar. He didn't run when officers approached. He didn't fight. He complied with orders to drop the weapon. He allowed himself to be handcuffed and taken into custody. This cooperation is unusual for someone in the middle of a violent rampage. It suggests Santos understood he was being arrested and chose not to resist. At the police station, through a Spanish interpreter, Santos is questioned. This is where his confession comes in. Police show him surveillance footage of the attacks. The interpreter explains what they're asking. Is that you in the video? Santos watches himself commit murder. He watches himself lift the bar. He watches himself kill sleeping men. And he confirms, yeah, that's me. This confession is legally problematic for the defense. Santos didn't say, I don't remember. He didn't say, I was out of my mind. He didn't say, that's not me. He recognized himself. He acknowledged his actions. He connected the person on video to himself. Defense attorneys will try to contextualize this confession. They'll argue Santos was still in the grip of his delusions. They'll argue he was confused. They'll argue the statement doesn't prove he understood the moral or legal wrongness of his actions. But prosecutors will counter, he recognized himself. That requires self-awareness. That requires understanding that the person committing those acts was him. And if he understood that, he understood enough to be held responsible. The prosecution has medical examiner testimony establishing cause of death for all 4 victims. Blunt force trauma to the head, multiple skull fractures, brain injuries. Each victim died from being beaten with a metal object consistent with the bar recovered from Santos. The medical examiner can't determine exact time of death with precision. The attacks happened within a 30-minute window between 1:30 and 2 a.m. on October 5, 2019. But the timeline is clear enough. All victims died within minutes of each other. All from the same weapon. All in the same area. This was a spree, one continuous course of violent conduct. Prosecutors also have testimony from David Hernandez, the survivor. Hernandez can describe being attacked. He can explain his injuries. He can tell jurors what it was like to wake up to a metal bar crashing into his skull. His survival is a miracle. His testimony is devastating. Then there's evidence of Santos' state of mind during the attacks. The fact that he looked around before striking. The fact that he paused when people approached. The fact that he waited for the couple to leave before continuing. All of this suggests consciousness, awareness, and an understanding that what he was doing was something people shouldn't see. New York's insanity defense requires the defense to prove Santos didn't understand the consequences of his actions and didn't know right from wrong. But if Santos knew enough to check for witnesses, did he know his actions were wrong? If he knew enough to pause when people approached, did he understand consequences? Prosecutors have one more piece of evidence that undermines the insanity defense. The trial run from a week earlier. Santos attacked someone with a wooden stick, badly injuring them. Then, a week later, he upgraded to a metal bar and killed 4 people. This progression suggests learning, testing, escalation. Santos tried violence with one weapon, saw it didn't fully satisfy whatever compulsion drove him, and tried again with a more lethal weapon. That's not psychotic break. That's evolution of violent behavior. Defense attorneys will argue the trial run proves Santos was increasingly controlled by delusions. Prosecutors will argue it proves Santos was experimenting with murder techniques. Same facts, opposite interpretations. The jury will decide which makes more sense. The prosecution's evidence is strong enough that no competent defense attorney would try to argue Santos didn't commit the crimes. The evidence is overwhelming. DNA, video, witnesses, confession, weapon, bodies. It all points to Santos. It all says he did it. So the defense has one option: yes, he did it. But he's not responsible because mental illness robbed him of the capacity to be held criminally accountable. That's the only argument that has any chance of working. Which brings us to the most controversial aspect of this trial: the insanity defense. The claim that Randy Santos heard voices telling him to kill 40 people or die. The argument that he was so sick, so delusional, so divorced from reality that he can't be sent to prison. Randy Santos' defense team isn't arguing he didn't kill 4 people. They're arguing he shouldn't be held criminally responsible because he was legally insane when he did it. This distinction is crucial, and it's one of the most controversial aspects of criminal law. The insanity defense is rare. It's used in less than 1% of criminal cases, and it succeeds even less often. Studies suggest success rates around 25% of the cases where it's attempted. Juries are skeptical. They see defendants who committed horrible crimes claiming mental illness and wonder if it's real or convenient. But in Santos' case, the mental illness is documented. He was diagnosed with schizophrenia by medical professionals while in jail months before the murders. He'd been diagnosed earlier with schizophreniform disorder. He'd gone to hospitals complaining of hearing voices. This isn't a defense created after arrest. This is a diagnosis that predates the crimes. Defense attorney Marnie Zine has a challenging task. She must convince a jury that Santos was so mentally ill on October 5, 2019, that he didn't understand the consequences of his actions and didn't know right from wrong. In New York, this is called the Manhattan test, and it's notoriously difficult to meet. During opening statements in January 2026, Zine laid out her theory. Santos heard voices. These voices told him he needed to kill 40 people or he would die. In his delusional state, Santos believed this was true. He believed his own life depended on killing others. From his distorted perspective, he wasn't committing murder, he was fighting for survival. He needed the voices to stop, Zine told jurors. He needed to save his own life. He saw no other way out. This framing is critical. The defense isn't saying Santos thought killing was okay. They're saying Santos believed he had no choice. The voices were so overwhelming, so commanding, so constant that he couldn't resist them. Kill or be killed. That was the delusion controlling him. Zine described the Chinatown rampage as the last in a line of increasingly violent episodes that began with a clash with his grandfather. She's establishing a pattern. Santos' mental illness manifested in violence that escalated over time. Each incident was more serious than the last. Each showed a man losing his grip on reality. The defense's key argument: Santos knew attacking people was legally wrong. He understood society says you can't kill people. But in his mind, twisted by schizophrenia and command hallucinations, he had to do it anyway. The legal wrongness was irrelevant compared to his delusional belief that he would die if he didn't obey the voices. This is where the insanity defense gets philosophically complex. If someone knows an act is illegal but believes they'll die if they don't commit it, do they know it's wrong in a meaningful sense? If your choice is commit murder or die yourself, and you genuinely believe that's the choice, are you morally responsible? New York's insanity test requires more than just mental illness. Lots of people with schizophrenia commit crimes and are held responsible. The question is whether the mental illness was so severe, so overwhelming, that it destroyed the person's capacity to understand what they were doing or to distinguish right from wrong. Zine has medical evidence on her side. Santos was diagnosed. He was prescribed medication. He needed treatment. This isn't disputed. The prosecution won't argue Santos wasn't mentally ill. They'll argue he wasn't insane according to legal standards. The defense will call psychiatric experts who evaluated Santos. These doctors will testify about schizophrenia, command hallucinations, and how delusions can override rational thought. They'll explain that voices commanding someone to kill can be so overwhelming that resistance feels impossible. They'll describe how untreated schizophrenia worsens over time. Santos was released from jail in August with prescriptions he never filled. By October, 2 months untreated, his condition had deteriorated. The voices got louder. The delusions got stronger. His grasp on reality weakened. But the prosecution has ammunition too. Santos' behavior during the attack suggests he retained some grip on reality. He looked around for witnesses. He paused when people approached. He recognized himself on surveillance video. These aren't the actions of someone completely divorced from reality. Prevailing with an insanity defense is particularly tough in New York. The state uses one of the stricter legal standards in the country. Santos lawyers must convince jurors beyond a reasonable doubt that mental illness destroyed his capacity to understand his actions or to know right from wrong. The defense can point to precedents. In 2022, a man who killed a young tourist by driving his car through crowds in Times Square was found not guilty by reason of insanity. That jury concluded he was so psychologically disturbed he didn't know what he was doing. He was sent to a mental health facility instead of prison. But there's a counter-precedent from 2018. A Manhattan nanny was convicted of killing 2 children in her care. Her lawyers argued she had an undiagnosed mental illness, heard voices, saw hallucinations, and snapped without understanding what she was doing. The jury rejected this defense and convicted her. She went to prison, not a psychiatric facility. What's the difference between these cases? Why does insanity defense work sometimes and fail other times? Juries look at the defendant's behavior. Did they take steps to hide evidence? Did they flee? Did they try to avoid detection? These behaviors suggest the defendant knew they were doing something wrong. In Santos' case, he was caught with the murder weapon. He didn't try to hide it. He didn't run. He was arrested at the scene. This could help his defense. He wasn't trying to avoid consequences because he didn't fully understand there would be consequences. But prosecutors will emphasize that Santos checked for witnesses before attacking. That behavior shows he understood witnesses were a problem. If he understood witnesses were a problem, he understood he was doing something he shouldn't be seen doing. That's consciousness of wrongdoing. The voices Santos heard, commanding him to kill 40 people, are central to his defense. Command hallucinations are a recognized symptom of schizophrenia. People hear voices telling them to do things, sometimes benign things, sometimes dangerous things. The voices can be so persistent, so loud, so real that people struggling with untreated schizophrenia feel compelled to obey. But here's where it gets complicated. Even people experiencing command hallucinations usually retain some ability to resist. Most people with schizophrenia who hear voices telling them to hurt others don't actually do it. They recognize the voices aren't real. They seek help. They take medication. They develop coping strategies. Santos did none of that. He had treatment referrals. He had prescriptions. He chose not to use them. Does that choice affect his legal insanity? If he had the capacity to choose whether to seek treatment, did he have the capacity to choose whether to obey voices? Defense will argue Santos was too sick to make rational decisions about treatment. You can't expect someone with severe mental illness to voluntarily seek treatment when the illness itself prevents rational thought. Prosecution will argue if Santos could choose not to seek treatment, he could choose not to kill. Both are choices. Both require some level of cognitive function. If he was competent enough to make one choice, he was competent enough to be held responsible for the other. The verdict will hinge on how jurors interpret Santos' actions. Did looking around for witnesses prove he knew killing was wrong? Or did it just prove he had enough residual awareness to try avoiding immediate capture while still unable to understand the broader moral implications? Did recognizing himself on video prove he understood his actions? Or did it just prove he could identify his own image without truly comprehending that the person committing those acts was morally and legally accountable? These are questions without clear answers. 12 jurors will debate them. They'll hear expert testimony from psychiatrists who examine Santos. They'll hear neurological explanations of how schizophrenia affects the brain. They'll see brain scans and medical records and treatment histories. And they'll make a decision that will determine whether Randy Santos spends life in prison or gets committed to a psychiatric facility where he could potentially be released if doctors determine he's no longer dangerous. January 27, 2026. More than 6 years after the Chinatown murders, Randy Santos' trial finally begins in Manhattan Criminal Court. The delay is typical for complex murder cases, especially those involving insanity defenses. Mental evaluations take time. Expert witnesses must be retained. Both sides need to prepare for a trial that's more about psychiatry than traditional criminal evidence. Santos, now 31 years old, sits at the defense table wearing an untucked white button-down shirt and a tie. He's flanked by his attorneys. Since his arrest in October 2019, he's cycled between jail and psychiatric treatment facilities. Whether he's been taking medication during this time, whether his condition has improved, whether the voices have quieted, these details haven't been made public. The courtroom is packed. Families of victims sit in the gallery. Media fills the press section. This trial has attracted attention because it raises fundamental questions about mental illness, criminal responsibility, and how society should handle people who commit terrible crimes while psychotic. Assistant District Attorney Alfred Peterson delivers the prosecution's opening statement. His goal is simple: convince jurors that regardless of Santos' mental illness, he understood enough to be held criminally responsible. Peterson walks jurors through the evidence. The surveillance footage showing Santos checking his surroundings. The pause when potential witnesses approached. The recognition when shown his own image on video. The confession, "Yeah, that's me." Evidence will show that Santos knew exactly what he was doing and the consequences of what he was doing. That he was killing these men. Peterson tells the jury. He emphasizes the word knew. That's what this trial is about. Not whether Santos was mentally ill, but whether his illness destroyed his capacity to know. Peterson describes how Santos looked up and down the street, how he saw the coast was clear before attacking, how he paused to let pedestrians leave the area before continuing his violence. These aren't the actions of someone completely detached from reality, Peterson argues. These are the actions of someone who understands he's committing crimes and doesn't want to be caught. He knew it was legally and morally wrong, Peterson states. That's the prosecution's entire case in one sentence. Defense attorney Marnie Zine delivers her opening through a Spanish interpreter for Santos' benefit. She acknowledges immediately that Santos killed 4 people. There's no point denying it. The evidence is overwhelming. Instead, she focuses on why it happened. Zine describes Santos' mental health history, the earlier diagnosis of schizophreniform disorder, the hospital visits complaining of voices, the schizophrenia diagnosis in jail, the treatment referrals and prescriptions he received upon release, and his failure to use them because he was too sick to recognize he needed help. He needed the voices to stop. He needed to save his own life. Zine explains. He saw no other way out. She describes the delusion that controlled Santos on October 5, 2019. Voices told him he had to kill 40 people or he would die. In his psychotic state, he believed this completely. It wasn't a choice between right and wrong. It was a choice between killing or dying. Zine walks jurors through the escalation of Santos' violence. The clash with his grandfather, the subway assault, the employment agency choking, the Brooklyn shelter attack, the trial run with the wooden stick. Each incident showed a man becoming more dangerous as his untreated mental illness worsened. She acknowledges that Santos knew killing was legally wrong, but she argues that in his delusional state, he believed he had to do it anyway to survive. The legal wrongness was abstract. The voices were immediate and overwhelming. As Zine speaks, Santos listens through his interpreter's headset. At times he appears to pay attention. At other times he seems distant. When Peterson speaks, Santos removes his headphones. Whether this is defiance, confusion, or simply his mental state manifesting is unclear. The trial will feature testimony from multiple witnesses. The couple who saw Santos beating a victim will take the stand. They'll describe what they witnessed, their horror, their confusion about what they were seeing, their eventual realization that they were watching murder. Police officers will testify about finding Santos with the bloody bar, about his arrest, about the interview where he recognized himself on video. Their testimony will establish the physical evidence and Santos' acknowledgement of his actions. The medical examiner will explain how the victims died. Blunt force trauma, multiple skull fractures, brain injuries. The testimony will be clinical but devastating. Jurors will understand the violence Santos inflicted. David Hernandez, the survivor, will testify. This will be emotional testimony. Hernandez will describe being attacked while sleeping, waking to pain, stumbling toward help, his permanent injuries, his trauma, his survival when 4 others died. Then come the psychiatric experts. Both sides will call doctors who evaluated Santos. The defense's experts will testify that Santos was legally insane, that his schizophrenia and command hallucinations destroyed his capacity to understand his actions or to distinguish right from wrong. As we continue, like, share, subscribe now and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what comes next. They'll explain how command hallucinations work, how voices can be so persistent, so loud, so seemingly real that people experiencing them feel compelled to obey. How untreated schizophrenia worsens over time. How Santos' 2 months without medication between his August release and October attacks allowed his condition to deteriorate catastrophically. The prosecution's experts will counter. They'll acknowledge Santos had schizophrenia, but they'll argue he retained enough understanding to be criminally responsible. They'll point to his behavior, checking for witnesses, pausing when people approached, recognizing himself on video. They'll explain that many people with schizophrenia who hear voices telling them to hurt others don't actually do it. That even with command hallucinations, most people retain some ability to resist. That Santos' violence was a choice, even if mental illness influenced that choice. The dueling expert testimony will be technical. Brain scans, neurological explanations, psychiatric diagnostic criteria. Jurors will hear about dopamine and serotonin and how antipsychotic medications work. They'll learn more about schizophrenia than they ever expected. Throughout the trial, Santos' demeanor will be scrutinized. Does he appear to understand what's happening? Does he show emotion when victims' families testify? Does he react when graphic evidence is shown? Everything he does or doesn't do will be analyzed for signs of his mental state. The prosecution will show surveillance footage. Jurors will watch Santos kill. They'll see him lift the bar. They'll see him bring it down. They'll see him check his surroundings. They'll watch men die. It will be brutal. It will be disturbing. And it will be evidence the defense can't refute. After witness testimony concludes, both sides will give closing arguments. Peterson will emphasize Santos' calculated behavior. Zine will emphasize his documented mental illness and untreated condition. Then the case goes to the jury. 12 people will deliberate. They'll review evidence. They'll debate whether Santos understood what he was doing, whether he knew it was wrong, whether mental illness excuses murder. The jury has two basic options. They can convict Santos of murder, rejecting the insanity defense, or they can find him not guilty by reason of insanity. If convicted, Santos faces life in prison. Murder in the first degree in New York carries a mandatory sentence of 20 years to life or 25 years to life depending on specific circumstances. Santos would likely never be released. If found not guilty by reason of insanity, Santos would be involuntarily committed to a psychiatric facility. He'd receive treatment, medication, therapy, and at some point in the future, if doctors determine he's no longer dangerous, he could potentially be released. That possibility terrifies victim families. The idea that Santos could someday walk free. The deliberations could take days. Insanity cases are complex. Jurors must sort through competing expert testimony, complex psychiatric concepts, and their own moral judgments about responsibility and mental illness. And eventually, they'll reach a verdict. Guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity. Prison or psychiatric hospital. Punishment or treatment. As Randy Santos' trial unfolds in January 2026, the central question isn't what happened on October 5, 2019. Everyone knows what happened. 4 men were beaten to death. 1 survived with catastrophic injuries. Santos did it. He admitted it. The evidence is overwhelming. The question is, what should happen to Randy Santos now? This question forces society to grapple with uncomfortable truths about mental illness, violence, and criminal justice. If Santos was genuinely psychotic, if voices commanding him to kill were as real to him as this trial is to the jury, is sending him to prison justice? Or is it punishing someone for being sick? But if Santos retained enough awareness to check for witnesses, to pause when people approached, to recognize himself on video, if he understood enough to try avoiding immediate capture, does that prove he knew what he was doing was wrong? And if he knew it was wrong, should mental illness excuse it? The stakes are enormous. If convicted, Santos will spend the rest of his life in prison. He'll die behind bars. He'll never walk free. That outcome satisfies our societal desire for punishment. Bad people who do bad things should suffer consequences. For people are dead. Someone must be held accountable. But if the insanity defense succeeds, Santos will go to a psychiatric facility. He'll receive treatment. Medication will quiet the voices. Therapy will help him process what he did. And eventually, years or decades from now, if doctors determine he's stable, medicated, and no longer dangerous, he could be released. That possibility horrifies victim families. The idea that the man who killed their loved ones could someday walk free seems like the opposite of justice. What kind of system lets a quadruple murderer potentially rejoin society? But here's the counter-argument. If Santos was sick, genuinely, documentably sick, and if treatment can cure that sickness, what purpose does lifelong imprisonment serve? Are we punishing mental illness? Are we locking someone up for being schizophrenic? These aren't easy questions. They expose the fundamental tension between retribution and rehabilitation, between punishment and treatment, between protecting society and acknowledging that mental illness can destroy a person's capacity to be held fully responsible for their actions. Victim families have complex feelings about this case. Some want Santos in prison forever. They want him to suffer as their loved ones suffered. They want justice that looks like punishment. Others recognize Santos was sick. They acknowledge the system failed him. They understand that untreated schizophrenia turned him into someone capable of murder. They might not forgive, but they recognize the tragedy has multiple victims, including Santos himself, whose mind betrayed him. The families of Chuen Kok, Anthony Manson, Florencio Moran, and Nazario Vásquez Villegas attend the trial. They sit through testimony. They see surveillance footage of their loved ones being killed. They hear experts debate whether Santos understood what he was doing. They wait for justice, whatever that means. David Hernandez, the survivor, carries physical and psychological scars. He survived when 4 others died. Survivor's guilt is real. Why did he live? Why did they die? Could he have stopped Santos? These questions haunt him. Hernandez's testimony at trial will be devastating. He'll describe the attack, the pain, the terror, the confusion. He'll show jurors his scars. He'll explain what it's like to know you almost died, to know 4 others did die, to know the man who attacked you might someday be released from a psychiatric hospital. The broader societal implications of this case matter. New York City, like many major cities, struggles with mental illness among homeless populations. Thousands of people with serious mental illness live on streets. Many refuse treatment. Many cycle through jails and hospitals without getting stable. Santos' case exposes this system's failures. He was diagnosed. He was given resources, but there was no follow-up, no enforcement, no way to compel treatment, and 2 months after release, he killed 4 people. What's the solution? Some argue for stronger involuntary commitment laws. If someone is diagnosed with severe mental illness and refusing treatment, the state should be able to force them into care. Better forced treatment than dead victims. Others argue involuntary commitment is a civil rights violation. You can't lock people up for being mentally ill, even if they're refusing treatment. The cure, forcibly medicating people against their will, is worse than the disease. Both arguments have merit. Both expose the impossible balance between individual liberty and public safety. Santos had the legal right to refuse treatment. He exercised that right, and 4 people died. How do we prevent that without violating everyone's civil liberties? The case also raises questions about criminal justice. Santos had 6 prior arrests for violence. 6 times the system processed him without mandating treatment. The 2017 subway assault case was dismissed despite a willing witness. That decision meant Santos had no assault conviction when evaluated in 2019. If that case had been prosecuted, if Santos had been convicted, if a judge had mandated psychiatric treatment as a condition of probation, could the Chinatown murders have been prevented? Would Santos have been medicated and supervised in October 2019 instead of homeless and psychotic? These counterfactuals matter. Every system failure was an opportunity for intervention. Every dismissed case, every missed follow-up, every gap between diagnosis and treatment, they add up. And on October 5, 2019, they resulted in 4 deaths. Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance's statement after Santos' indictment acknowledged this. There is perhaps no population more vulnerable to violence than the growing number of unsheltered New Yorkers who lack a safe place to sleep. He was right, but the vulnerability runs both ways. Unsheltered people are vulnerable to violence from others. But society is also vulnerable when mentally ill people go untreated and unsupervised. Santos was both perpetrator and victim of system failures. The trial's outcome will set precedent. If Santos' insanity defense succeeds, it will embolden other defendants with similar mental health histories to pursue the same strategy. If it fails, it will signal that even documented schizophrenia and command hallucinations can't excuse murder if the defendant showed any awareness or calculation. Prosecutors across New York will watch this verdict. Defense attorneys will study it. Future cases will be argued with Santos as reference point. Did the jury buy the insanity defense? What specific evidence convinced them one way or the other? What does it take to prove legal insanity in New York? For Marnie Zine, Santos' defense attorney, this is a career-defining case. Insanity defenses are rare and risky. If she wins, she'll be known for pulling off one of the hardest defenses in criminal law. If she loses, Santos dies in prison. For Alfred Peterson, the prosecutor, the goal is straightforward. Convince jurors that mental illness doesn't excuse murder when the defendant showed enough awareness to try avoiding witnesses. Prove Santos knew what he was doing. Prove he knew it was wrong. Get a conviction. As the trial progresses through January 2026, media coverage is intense. Daily updates, legal analysis, psychiatric experts weigh in on television. Everyone has an opinion about whether Santos should go to prison or a hospital. Some see this as a test of how seriously we take mental illness. If we accept that schizophrenia can destroy someone's capacity for moral judgment, we must accept that people in psychotic states can't always be held fully responsible. That's not excusing murder. That's acknowledging mental illness is real and devastating. Others see this as a test of whether we're too soft on crime. For people are dead. Santos killed them. He should face maximum punishment. Mental illness might explain violence, but it shouldn't excuse it. Victims deserve justice that looks like accountability. The jury will deliberate these arguments. They'll review evidence. They'll debate. Eventually they'll vote. And their verdict will answer the question at the heart of this case. Is Randy Santos a murderer who deserves prison, or a victim of mental illness who deserves treatment? Whatever they decide, it won't bring back Chuen Kok. Won't resurrect Anthony Manson. Won't revive Florencio Moran or Nazario Vásquez Villegas. Won't erase David Hernandez's scars. The dead stay dead. The injured stay injured. Justice in any form is limited. Can't undo harm. Can only determine consequences. Prison or hospital. Punishment or treatment. Retribution or rehabilitation. The verdict is pending. The trial continues. And four families wait to see what kind of justice the legal system can provide for the people they lost. If cases like this matter to you, if you believe in justice for victims while understanding the complexity of mental illness and crime, subscribe and share this video. The Randy Santos trial is ongoing. When the verdict comes, we'll be here to break it down. Let people know that cases like this demand attention, demand discussion, and demand that we grapple with hard questions about responsibility, illness, and how we protect the vulnerable while holding the violent accountable. Randy Santos, 31 years old, diagnosed with schizophrenia, released untreated, killed for people while hearing voices, admitted it, and now a jury must decide whether he's guilty of murder or a victim of his own mind.